The death of King Henry V in 1422, consequences for England and the 100 Years' War. The death of King Henry V of England in 1422 marked a significant turning point in English and European history. Henry V, who ascended to the throne in 1413, was a charismatic leader and a military genius whose reign was dominated by his campaigns in France during the latter phase of the 100 Years' War. His untimely death at the age of 35 abruptly ended a period of English ascendancy in France, and the consequences of his passing reverberated through the political, military, and diplomatic landscapes of both countries for decades. Henry's victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 and his subsequent conquests had placed England in a dominant position, and the Treaty of Troyes, 1420, established him as heir and regent of France. This had raised expectations that England would soon achieve a lasting victory in the 100 Years' War, making his death a dramatic and destabilizing event. Henry's death not only shattered English hopes for a swift conclusion to the conflict, but also boosted the morale of French factions resisting English domination. The sudden loss of a strong and determined leader created a void that his successors struggled to fill, affecting the balance of power between England and France for years to come. The death of Henry V in 1422 precipitated a series of events that exposed the inherent weaknesses of the English position in France, undermined the stability of his newly established dual monarchy, and ultimately contributed to the protracted conflict and political upheaval that characterized the later stages of the 100 Years' War. The circumstances of Henry V's death. Henry V died unexpectedly on August 31, 1422, at the Château de Vincennes near Paris. The cause of his death is still debated by historians, but contemporary accounts suggest that he succumbed to dysentery, a common affliction among soldiers and travelers in the medieval period. Some sources, like the chronicler Jean de Wavrin, also mention fever and other symptoms that may have been exacerbated by the grueling conditions of the campaign. Henry had been actively campaigning in France since his famous victory at Agincourt in 1415, which had solidified his reputation as one of England's greatest military leaders. By the time of his death, he was at the height of his power, having won significant victories and secured the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, which made him heir to the French throne and regent of France on behalf of the ailing King Charles VI. Henry's death came at a critical juncture. He was preparing for a final campaign to consolidate English control over the remaining French territories not yet under his rule. The suddenness of his death caught both his allies and his enemies by surprise, leading to shock and uncertainty in England and France. In England, there was immediate concern over the succession, given that his heir, Henry VI, was an infant. In France, Henry's demise created an unexpected opportunity for those opposed to English rule to regroup and resist. Charles VII, the Dauphin, reportedly saw Henry's death as a divine signal of England's impending downfall, strengthening his resolve to reclaim his rightful throne. Joan of Arc, who would soon emerge as a key figure in the French resistance, is said to have believed that Henry's death was a sign of God's will favoring the French cause. Henry's death not only halted plans for further conquest, but also created a leadership vacuum at the heart of the English war effort. The absence of his authoritative presence weakened English morale and emboldened French resistance, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in the dynamics of the ongoing conflict. Immediate consequences for England and France. The death of Henry V had immediate and profound consequences for both England and France. In England, it led to a period of regency, as Henry VI was an infant, incapable of ruling independently. The governance of England and the English-held territories in France was entrusted to a council of nobles, led by Henry's brothers, John, Duke of Bedford, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. This arrangement, however, was inherently unstable. The regency was marked by internal divisions and factionalism, as the nobles vied for influence and power. Without the unifying presence of Henry V, whose personal leadership had commanded respect and loyalty, the English court became increasingly fragmented. The power vacuum created by Henry's death exacerbated pre-existing tensions among the English nobility. John, Duke of Bedford, was appointed regent of France and took charge of the war effort across the Channel, while Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, was named Protector of England. The division of responsibilities, while practical on paper, led to significant conflicts of interest. Gloucester's confrontational style and his ambitions to assert greater authority in England often clashed with Bedford's more diplomatic approach in France. The lack of a central, authoritative figure in English governance weakened the decision-making process, contributing to a sense of disarray and indecisiveness in both realms. In France, Henry's death emboldened those opposed to English rule. The Treaty of Troyes had been deeply unpopular among many French factions, particularly the Armagnacs, who remained loyal to the Dauphin Charles, the disinherited son of Charles VI. Henry V's death provided a critical opportunity for the French resistance to regroup and reorganize. The Dauphin Charles, later Charles VII, was able to capitalize on this moment of English vulnerability to strengthen his position. His supporters were buoyed by the belief that the death of the English king would herald a change in fortunes in the ongoing conflict. Many local French nobles, who had begrudgingly accepted the terms of the Treaty of Troyes, began to reassess their alliances, leading to a gradual erosion of English support in key regions. The fragile peace established by the Treaty of Troyes quickly began to unravel. Without Henry's strong leadership and military acumen, the English position in France became increasingly precarious. The treaty's terms, which stipulated that Henry V and his heirs would inherit the French throne upon the death of Charles VI, were now cast into doubt. The death of both Henry V and Charles VI in 1422 further complicated matters, leaving the infant Henry VI nominally king of both England and France, but unable to assert his authority in either realm effectively. This led to a protracted period of instability, where the English struggled to maintain their control over French territories, while Charles VII consolidated his power and legitimacy among the French nobility. Challenges of the dual monarchy. The dual monarchy created by the Treaty of Troyes was inherently problematic. It was based on the assumption that Henry V's military successes and his diplomatic skills would ensure its stability. However, with Henry's death, the fragile arrangement was immediately threatened. The English regency, under the leadership of the Duke of Bedford, faced the enormous challenge of maintaining control over the French territories while simultaneously managing affairs in England. The dual monarchy demanded a strong, centralized authority that could command loyalty in both realms, but the absence of a mature and decisive king made this exceedingly difficult. In France, the political situation was further complicated by the deep divisions within French society. The Armagnac and Burgundian factions had been in conflict for years, and while the Treaty of Troyes had aligned the Burgundians with the English, this alliance was tenuous and primarily opportunistic. The death of Henry V undermined this alliance, as many Burgundians began to reconsider their position and entertain the possibility of rapprochement with the Dauphin Charles. The English faced significant administrative and logistical challenges in maintaining the dual monarchy. Governing distant territories like Normandy and Aquitaine required substantial resources, and communication between England and its continental holdings was often slow and unreliable. The cost of maintaining garrisons and defending against French counterattacks strained the English treasury, leading to frequent financial crises. The Regency Council was forced to impose new taxes, which led to domestic unrest and resistance among the English populace. Moreover, the English administration in France had to navigate complex local politics, dealing with both English loyalists and hostile French factions. The inability to establish a stable governance structure further weakened the English position in France and made it increasingly difficult to enforce the terms of the Treaty of Troyes. The lack of a strong English monarch to enforce the treaty's terms also emboldened Charles VII, who was able to rally support among French nobles and consolidate his position in the south of France. His coronation at Reims in 1429, following the intervention of Joan of Arc, marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War. Charles' ability to present himself as the legitimate king of France, in contrast to the infant Henry VI, helped to galvanize French resistance and undermine English claims to the French throne. The challenges of maintaining the dual monarchy, therefore, exposed the limits of English power and highlighted the growing strength of French nationalism and resistance. Impact on the 100 Years' War. Henry V's death significantly altered the course of the 100 Years' War. Under Henry's leadership, England had achieved a series of stunning military successes, most notably the victory at Agincourt, which had bolstered English morale and established a strong foothold in northern France. His strategic acumen, charismatic leadership, and ability to maintain discipline among his troops had been central to these successes. His death left a vacuum in military leadership that was not easily filled. The Duke of Bedford, Henry's brother, assumed command of the English forces in France and attempted to maintain the momentum of the English war effort. Bedford was a competent leader, but he lacked his brother's charisma and the same level of authority over the English nobility and military. Bedford's position was further weakened by the need to divide his attention between France and England, where political instability and factionalism were on the rise. His reliance on Burgundian support, which was increasingly uncertain, further complicated the English war effort. The Burgundians, recognizing the precariousness of the English position, began to hedge their bets and negotiate with both sides. The death of Henry V also changed the strategic calculus for both sides. For the English, the initial reaction was to hold on to what had been gained and to maintain the terms of the Treaty of Troyes. However, this proved increasingly difficult in the face of growing French resistance and the financial strain of maintaining garrisons and conducting military campaigns in hostile territory. The English government found itself under increasing pressure, both militarily and financially, as it struggled to support the war effort without the strong, centralized leadership that Henry V had provided. For the French, Henry's death was a rallying point. It allowed Charles VII to consolidate his position and build alliances, including with the powerful Duchy of Burgundy, which had previously supported the English cause. Joan of Arc's arrival on the scene in 1429 provided a further boost to French morale and was a turning point in the war. Under her leadership, the French achieved several important victories, including the lifting of the Siege of Orleans and the coronation of Charles VII at Reims. These victories shifted the momentum of the war in favor of the French and began to erode the English position in France. Political instability in England. Henry V's death also had profound implications for the internal political situation in England. The Regency government established to rule on behalf of the infant Henry VI was inherently unstable. The division of power among Henry V's surviving brothers, particularly John, Duke of Bedford, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, created tensions and factionalism within the English court. Bedford, stationed in France, was focused on maintaining English holdings there, while Gloucester, as Lord Protector of England, dealt with the political situation at home. Their differing priorities and personalities led to frequent conflicts and undermined the coherence of English governance. Gloucester's confrontational style and his tendency to overstep his authority alienated many of the English nobility and created further divisions within the government. Additionally, the minority of Henry V meant that England was ruled by a council of nobles who often had competing interests and ambitions. This lack of unity weakened the government's ability to make decisive decisions, both in domestic affairs and in the prosecution of the war in France. The political instability in England was exacerbated by economic difficulties. The cost of the war in France placed a heavy burden on the English treasury, leading to increased taxation and widespread discontent among the population. The government's financial troubles were compounded by the frequent devaluation of currency and the inability to raise sufficient revenue to fund the war effort effectively. These economic pressures contributed to a growing sense of dissatisfaction with the Regency government and increased tensions between different factions of the English nobility. Furthermore, local uprisings and unrest, such as the Southampton Plot of 1415 and later conflicts in the Welsh Marches, demonstrated the fragility of England's internal stability during this period. Legacy and long-term consequences. The death of Henry V in 1422 had long-term consequences for both England and France. In England, it marked the beginning of a period of political instability and internal conflict that would eventually culminate in the Wars of the Roses. The weakness of the Regency government, combined with the factionalism and economic difficulties of the period, set the stage for future conflicts over the succession and the legitimacy of the monarchy. The absence of a strong monarch created an environment where rival factions within the English nobility could vie for power, leading to decades of political turmoil. Henry VI, who eventually took control of the throne in his own right, proved to be a weak and ineffective ruler. His inability to assert authority and his frequent lapses into mental illness further undermined the stability of the English government and contributed to the outbreak of civil war. The political turmoil of the mid-15th century can thus be traced back, in part, to the vacuum of leadership created by Henry V's untimely death. His death deprived England of the strong, decisive leadership needed to navigate the complex challenges of the time, leaving the country vulnerable to internal divisions and external threats. In France, Henry V's death provided a crucial opportunity for the French to reverse their fortunes in the 100 Years' War. The death of a strong and capable English king allowed Charles VII to consolidate his position and build the alliances necessary to reclaim French territory from English control. The successes of the French, particularly following the intervention of Joan of Arc, marked a turning point in the war and shifted the momentum decisively in their favor. By the time of the Treaty of Arras in 1435, which ended the alliance between England and Burgundy, the English position in France had weakened significantly. Over the next 2 decades, the French would gradually reclaim most of the territory lost to the English, culminating in the loss of Bordeaux in 1453 and the effective end of the 100 Years' War. Henry V's death, therefore, played a crucial role in facilitating the eventual French victory and the reassertion of French sovereignty over its territories. The death of Henry V also influenced the development of English nationalism and the ideological foundations of future conflicts. As the English monarchy grappled with internal and external challenges, a new sense of English identity began to emerge, shaped by the experiences of war, loss, and resistance. This evolving nationalism would later play a significant role in the Wars of the Roses and other conflicts, as English society sought to redefine itself in the wake of its changing fortunes. Conclusion. The death of King Henry V in 1422 was a watershed moment in English and French history. It abruptly ended a period of English ascendancy in France and created a leadership vacuum that had profound implications for both the continuation of the 100 Years' War and the internal politics of England. Henry's death exposed the inherent weaknesses of the English dual monarchy, undermined the stability of English governance, and provided a critical opportunity for the French to regroup and reclaim their lost territories. In the long term, Henry V's death set the stage for future political instability in England, contributing to the conditions that led to the Wars of the Roses. For France, it was a turning point that allowed for the eventual reunification of the kingdom under a single sovereign and the emergence of a stronger, more centralized state. The death of Henry V, therefore, was not just a personal tragedy or a military setback. It was a pivotal event that reshaped the political and military landscape of late medieval Europe, influencing the course of history for decades to come. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.